Hey jerks, and welcome to the Beer Jerk Beer of the Week. I'm Matt.
And I'm Luke.
And this is Chupacabra. Chupacabra is our Mexican cold IPA.
What?
Exactly. Cheers.
An hour because we made it. So it's another beer from Small Gods. I think hopefully you enjoy getting a few Small Gods beers in your Beer of the Week. We try and make sure we don't put every single Small Gods beer in the subscription because it's not a Small Gods subscription box. It's a Beer Jerk subscription box with lots of different breweries. But yeah, sometimes we make a beer and we want to share it with everybody and hear what you think about it.
Yeah, and as Luke says, what the fuck is a Mexican cold IPA?
What is a Mexican cold IPA?
So, a Mexican cold IPA is a weird idea that we had. Basically, a cold IPA is an IPA that is fermented using a lager yeast, and so it's fermented at colder temperatures than an IPA usually is. And I hear you ask, wait, isn't that just an IPL? No, it's not. Because the distinction that I come to is that, to me, an IPL is a hoppy lager, whereas a cold IPA is a lagery IPA. So the first thing that you're probably all going to notice about this beer is it's got a lot more bitterness than an IPL does, which is kind of sits more at the lager end of the bitterness spectrum, whereas this is kind of 63 IBUs, which is much more in the territory of an IPA. And actually, it was described by Kevin Davey, who's the brewer who invented the style from a brewery called Wayfinder up in the Pacific Northwest of America, as more West Coast than West Coast, so crisper, more bitter, and really having that kind of old school West Coast edge to it is kind of what we're going for there.
Yeah, old school, as in 15 years ago, maybe, or thereabouts, or maybe not quite that far ago in New Zealand. But there was the IBU wars, where brewers were releasing IPAs and they were just getting bitter and bitter and bitterer. And then the pendulum swung the opposite way with New England IPAs and hazy IPAs, which of course aren't bitter at all.
Trying to get softer and softer and fluffier and fluffier.
So this is really fun, just to sort of bring us back to those days of 2008 when beers were just very bitter, and a lot were just stupid and like unpalatable because it was just like saying, like trying to make the sweetest chocolate cake or something like that. It's a characteristic that you want to balance with the other characters in a beverage.
Yeah,
and I like the bitterness in this.
Yeah, and it's something that it's definitely at the upper end of the bitterness spectrum there, particularly because as a cold IPA, it's got a lager base to it. So brings us back to what makes it Mexican, is actually use the base from a Mexican lager. So that is basically 70% Pilsner malt and 30% malted corn. So there's really kind of no sweetness to hide behind that you, unlike that you have in those old school West Coast IPAs, which, while they were super, super bitter, often were really sweet and kind of caramelly as well from using a lot of crystal malts. Whereas this has none of that, and that kind of brings it back to that more West Coast than West Coast idea, where it's kind of really crisp, really dry, and really bitter.
It's really light-bodied, and yeah, I know it's a thing that people say a lot about a drink being dangerously drinkable, but it kind of is. It's really light in body, and just the dry finish to it just keeps you coming back for more sips, and the bitterness of it. And it is 6.7%, so definitely not a beer that you want to be having lots and lots of.
But yeah, especially as you get I find I've had quite a few of these now. It's like as you get kind of 3/4 halfway through the glass and kind of acclimatise to that bitterness, the drinkability goes way up. Because as I said, that bitterness is there as a challenge right up at the front of the beer, which we think is nice and exciting. It's good to kind of take it back to that note.
So cold IPA. So we've seen a few other cold IPAs coming out at the moment. It's a bit of a it's sort of a new-ish trend, and that we're seeing a little bit of here in New Zealand, which is really cool to see. A bit of a different take on an IPA. But then the Mexican cold IPA, which I think we probably invented.
Yeah, I think we did. Wholesale.
And the whole idea for this beer came about from reading about Neo-Mexicanus hops, which it's pretty amazing actually, the story of, I suppose agriculture and the story of any kind of plant as it introduces itself to different places. The story of hops, as you all know, is that hops emerged tens of thousands, well, hundreds of thousands of years ago in the central plains of what is now Mongolia. And they self-introduced themselves across Europe and into Britain. And then hop farmers, especially in southern England and in Germany, bred these hops. And they ended up with varieties such as Fuggles, which is the greatest hop variety.
Love Fuggles.
And then from these Kent hops, they were then exported to North America and much later to New Zealand and everywhere else around the world. So we have our wonderful hops, like here in New Zealand we have Rakow, we have Nelson Sauvin. In America they have things like Citra and Amarillo. They all come from these hops that were developed and bred in Kent. But while this was happening, some hops just introduced themselves to the southern states of what is now the USA and Mexico and Central America. So this area of sort of Southern California, Texas, Mexico, New Mexico, where hops just introduced themselves. And fairly recently, hop growers and brewers just discovered these hops just growing wild. And to look at a Neo-Mexicanus hop compared to a hop that's been sort of developed and bred and cultivated, it's almost like looking at a wolf compared to a German Shepherd.
They're all shaggy and like all the leaves are kind of curling up, and whereas a lot of the cultivated hops are quite smooth and
this perfect cone. And they've just been doing their own thing, and they haven't been bred for humans' flavour preferences in beer, but just bred for just what works in their climate. So as such, they don't have the characteristics that people have been trying to breed into hops, which are characters like pine, like citrus, like tropical fruit flavours. There's a whole bunch of just interesting, really unusual flavours in these Neo-Mexicanus hops, such as coconut is a major one.
Yeah, so the Neo-Mexicanus hop that you're probably the most familiar with that's been popular in recent years is Sabro. That kind of really burst onto the scene a couple of years ago, or even within the last year, really.
We've seen a couple of great New Zealand brewers. So Three Sisters did a really good IPA with Sabro a year or two ago.
Yeah, and
Epic did one.
Yeah, the Epic one was particularly good, I thought.
Yeah.
But there are a few other varieties. So El Dorado, which has been around for a few years, is a Neo-Mexicanus hop, as are the other two that we've used in this beer, Zappa and Talus. And they give a really kind of unique hop flavour profile to the beer.
Completely unique flavour, yeah.
Now this one isn't so coconutty as Sabro tends to be, though there is a hint of that. But there's a kind of interesting herbal note, almost something kind of slightly smoky. You get kind of watermelon, mint. So it's a really kind of unusual flavour profile that is not something that you'd usually expect.
And it's hard to put your finger on and try and find the descriptors for these flavours, because it is, like interesting herbs will be how I'll put it really, but it's definitely not like, you have some hop profiles and they just taste like white grape or they taste like tangerine. But this is, it's kind of like nothing else with it, this blend of Neo-Mexicanus we've used. Yeah,
but also interestingly fruity. But as I said, very hard to put your finger on.
So I'm looking forward to hearing what your thoughts are in the reviews.
Yes.
Of what you taste.
Yeah, and so there's heaps out there. Talus is a particular favourite of mine. And again, Epic did a really good Talus single hop IPA a little while ago called Talisman. But there is one more thing which makes it a Mexican lager, which is that we use Mexican lager yeast. So when we were putting it together, we were thinking about Neo-Mexicanus hops, and then we were like, we can use a Mexican lager base to bring it back. And so the malt, the hops, the yeast, and yeast are all kind of influenced by Mexico, and that kind of ties it all together, and that's what makes it a Mexican cold IPA.
Plus the picture on the can.
Which is a Chupacabra, which we should talk about as well.
Yes, a Chupacabra is something that apparently lots of people know about. I didn't know what one was until Matt told me, so it's quite interesting just to read about the mythology of probably one of the newer mythological creatures in the world, a Chupacabra.
Yeah, so from the 80s is the kind of where the origin gets traced back to. And it's kind of, I think, somewhat related in its imagery to Mexican hairless dogs, which are these terrifying looking, if you've seen hairless cats, it's like that, but a dog. They've got no hair and they look kind of feral and wolfish and pretty terrifying. And the myth is that the Chupacabra kind of lives in the desert and sucks the blood of goats. Because I think there were a bunch of exsanguinated goats found around this kind of New Mexico area, and
with two puncture wounds in their neck, and how the blood sucked out of them.
People have seen these Mexican hairless dogs around and put two and two together, so it's this kind of mythological goat-sucking desert creature.
And there's reports that they sort of look like aliens, or like there might be coyotes that have got skin lesions, or so. We got in touch with this wonderful artist Izzy Curran, and told her the idea, and she was like, "Yeah, I love the Chupacabra. I've really wanted to illustrate one of those." So we commissioned her to make this really nailed the brief of this like freaking scary vampire alien dog creature thing. And Chupacabra, as you probably know, comes from the Spanish words of chupa, which means to suck, like chupa chups, and cabra, which means goat.
So yeah, goat sucker.
Goat sucker.
Which is why on the bottom it says, "Suck on this." That's Chupacabra. It's something we're really excited about. It's interesting and different, and we've been drinking a lot of it. And despite some of the negative reviews we've been getting, no, there is no chili in it. There's not supposed to be. It's like, there's no chili in here at all. It's like, we know.
0 stars.
But yeah, I hope you like it, and we're interested to hear your feedback in the members group.
And when we started out making beers at Small Gods, we sort of steered clear of IPAs, and we weren't that bothered about doing IPAs, just because, there's so much amazing IPA in New Zealand. We're just like, how the hell could we compete with Liberty and making an IPA? How are we going to make a beer that is just anywhere near as good as an IPA that's going to come out of Garage Project? And we've done 2 now, which is kind of surprising. The first one was the collaboration with Boat Rocker, which was Elvis Juice. That was the grapefruit dip hopped IPA, and now this one. But I think that with both of those beers, we've taken such a different approach to it, which is what we're all about, just finding unusual styles and different
new techniques and stuff like that.
Yeah, totally. So as much as we weren't that bothered about making IPAs to begin with, we might make a few more IPAs if we can find good reasons to do them.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're looking to drink some more Small Gods beer, we have also recently released a couple of weeks ago Lyra, which is our Baltic Porter. It's a Black Forest Baltic Porter using rescued Central Otago cherries, which were provided by the sustainability specialists at Citizen. And we've got some Dutch cocoa and Tongan vanilla in there. So it's a kind of our answer to pastry stouts, but in a more kind of grown-up dark chocolate way rather than kind of the sweet syrupy way, which we also love if you've seen some of our other previous releases. But yeah, really going for that kind of bitter, roasty, big,
classy dark chocolate
beer. And so that's available on the website now as well if you'd like to check out something else from Small Gods.
Is Larry going in the subscription box?
Yes.
It is. So you may see that coming up in 6 or 8 weeks if you're a subscriber. But yeah, well worth stocking up on a few of, because that being a Baltic Porter, it's so sort of the opposite to hop forward beers. It's going to get better with age, and that's a beer that's sort of going to meld, and it would have quite a different character to it, sort of 6 months or a year from now. So yeah, definitely worth grabbing a few Lyras or Black Forest Gatto Baltic Porter.
Yeah. And in the meantime, if you're keen to come and check out what events we've got going on, this Saturday here at the Fridge Flagon, we've got our mini fresh hop event. We're going to have a selection of some delicious fresh hop beers in a range of styles. We've tried to steer away from a full hazy lineup, despite 90% of the fresh hop beers this year being hazies. We've got a dip hop pilsner, an XPA, double IPA. We do have a couple of hazies as well. So we've tried to pick out kind of the most interesting from this year's fresh hop selection. So you can come check that out this Saturday. That's the 23rd.
Here at the Fridge Flagon.
And we've also got our Behind the Brews event with Deep Creek coming up. So that's a really cool tasting with Scott Taylor of Deep Creek, who's going to be taking you through a selection from the history of Deep Creek's most important beers, talking about stories behind the beer, and having a chat with Luke and entertaining you for an evening while you drink some delicious Deep Creek beer. And that's coming up on Thursday the 28th.
It's going to be a really good time.
Tickets for that are available through our website if you search Behind the Brews, or you can find them through the event on our Facebook page.
Cool. I don't think there's a lot of tickets left for that, so grab a ticket right now if you're keen to go. Come along.
Right.
That's it from me.
That's it from me. Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers.
Cheers.